know if it was too full. All right, I'm going to go ahead and admit people. Are we ready?
I hope so.
All right. Hello. How's it going, everyone? Hey, Mary. Hey, Beta. I'm just going to be admitting people for a few minutes while we come up to a critical mass from the waiting room. Mary, how are you?
I'm okay.
Good. I feel like it's been a while since I've seen you in person, so it's great to have you here.
Yeah, look good.
Next best thing. So if folks want to introduce themselves in the chat, that's typically how we begin these calls. So feel free to drop a note in the chat with your name. If you're affiliated with an organization, you're welcome to mention that. You're welcome to share what you're gonna, what your favorite Halloween candy is. That's always a good one this time of year. Mine is Snickers. It's always been Snickers. I've always had a thing for Snickers. I don't know. But they have to be in the refrigerator, which is an interesting caveat. So we're 2 minutes after, and things have slowed down a little bit on the waiting room side, and I have Anne Marie here to help me keep an eye on that as well. We have a little bit more of an informal agenda today, and so, I welcome folks that are interested in participating to know that you'll have an opportunity to do that, to share advocacy opportunities or things that are coming related to the food system that you think folks on this call should be aware of. So just giving folks a heads up, if there's anything that you want to add, there will be a time for that later today. But I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Michelle Caruso. If we haven't met, I lead the Food Council's policy and advocacy work, among many other hats that all of us wear because we're a small nonprofit team. I'm joined by my several colleagues who will introduce themselves in the chat, I'm sure, and can wave if you're on camera, from our Food Council team, just forcing people to wave, love it. And Anne Marie, I do want to call out that, Anne Marie is sort of my backup facilitator today from our team, who is going to take over in case something weird happens to my computer or my internet. So thanks, Anne Marie. Typically, my colleague Jack Ewert leads these calls, but unfortunately, Jack is out sick today, so you're stuck with me. But I think we're going to have a great discussion, and we're really excited to hear from two speakers about two coalitions that are currently happening in our community or in Maryland that are hopefully going to impact the way that the food system works in the future based on the important work that they're doing. And then we're going to hear a little bit about two recent events that occurred. One was the Maryland Hunger Solutions annual legislative brainstorming event that occurred last Wednesday. And the other is the Food Council's annual legislator breakfast with our state elected officials that took place last Thursday. I think in the future, we should probably not have both those events on the same week, but this year that coordination didn't occur early enough. So we really bombarded our state elected officials with food system messages in back-to-back days. But let's just pretend that was the strategy. It's October Food System Advocacy Week or something. So first, I think I'm turning over to Julia first to talk about the Universal School Meals Coalition that Maryland Hunger Solutions leads. And then there'll be time for questions for Julia after she, shares her updates.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. And yes, I think that
I think we're going with that was our strategy too, to have both events and keep pushing our messages out all at the same time. And not because we had capacity issues and had to push the event a month. All right. Well, yes, I'm going to give some updates on healthy school meals for all. And I can share some slides here. I do have some updated slides. If I'm able to share. If not, I can just talk through some things. Um, but I didn't even introduce myself.
I
Hi,
just,
everyone. Oh, did I freeze or did Michelle freeze?
I think you're a co-host now if you want to share your slides.
Oh, okay, awesome. Um, yes. Hi everyone, Julie Gross from Maryland Hunger Solutions. And I can pull this up and hopefully get this into the right presenter mode if that works. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I know I'm speaking to the choir here. I don't really have to go into too much detail around why we are advocating for school meals for all students, but just to give a little bit of background, I'm sure most folks who have been around for a couple of years can remember back to the pandemic when we saw Healthy School Meals for All in action. When schools closed down and the government stepped in, the federal government stepped in to provide school meals at no cost to all students. That was a huge game changer for the way that we look at school meals. These programs are one of our nation's first lines of defense against childhood hunger. We have seen that participation in school meals have numerous benefits to students, including lifelong healthy eating habits, better academic performance, and success overall. So we really don't have, I think at this point, we really don't have to push that messaging too much because people understand and, see the benefits of school meals, particularly in groups like these. But we do have a lot of challenges with the programs and not being able to cover every single student is I think the biggest one that we have so far. So when we returned to that tiered payment system after the pandemic supports ended, we've just seen a really massive increase in school meal debt, and the number of students who are kind of falling through that gap. So this is a number. I've just added this number in. This is a number that we got from the Food and Nutrition Service Director at Montgomery County Public Schools just a couple of days ago. The self-sufficiency standard to survive in Montgomery County for a family of four, I keep saying is over 100,000 a year, but it's over, I just looked at the slides again, it's over $122,000 dollars a year. And the cutoff for a family of four to be able to qualify for free meals in Maryland and across the entire country is 57,000. So there's just a huge gap and it keeps growing and growing, where we see families kind of falling through and struggling more and more to kind of make ends meet and keep food on the table. And that level of being able to qualify for assistance, particularly with school meals, has not increased at the same rate. So yeah, just a lot of kids that are struggling with that. A lot of families are struggling with that. And so we see this as a really huge safety net program that is this next step of being able to cover meals for all students is really going to be critical. It's just going to be such a game changer for families who are in that position. So a little bit of background. This is not the first step that Maryland has taken. This is a huge ask to, get the state to cover meals for everybody, but this is not the first time that we've asked the state to step in and cover meals for students that are not covered under the federal threshold. So we do have a program called Maryland Meals for Achievement that a lot of schools in Montgomery, I think over 100 schools in Montgomery County participate in at this point. And those are the schools that receive free breakfast. and do breakfast in the classroom or breakfast after the bell and cover the cost of breakfast for all students. We've helped to pass legislation that expands community eligibility and the ability for schools to do community eligibility. The state has opted into the Medicaid Direct Certification pilot, which connects more students to free meals and also supports community eligibility schools. And then we also cover the reduced price copay as a state for students. So the state has stepped in and covered the cost of reduced price meals for students. So all of those kids get free meals as well. So coming in and asking for healthy school meals for all is really just building off of a lot of successes that we've had. And I should have added a slide in here about the federal landscape as well. So this is the Maryland landscape. But we are trying to build off of these successes and then meet where we are also as a nation. There are a lot of other states that have been able to take this step ahead of us. So 8 states right now, we're hoping to be the 9th. But it is a long journey. So we've asked a number of times for the state to do this. It's taking years. And I think we are, have hoped in the past that it would be a little bit faster than this, that we would be able to get this done a little bit faster, particularly in such a wealthy and progressive state that has made such great progress over the years. But we've previously gotten a lot of pushback on the cost. So I think in conversations that we've had up until now, there is a lot of support for this idea. I think, as I said, we haven't had to push too hard on the benefits of school meals. I think most folks, even, in the legislature, most policymakers understand how important school meals are, and they understand that this is a great support system for families. But it is an expensive investment. And I think there's still a lot of space to kind of build that political will and really bring this this campaign up as a major priority, because it's a really nice idea, but I think at this point it's not just a nice idea. It really is a critical support line for our families. And it's also a really kind of a little bit of, I keep saying, a little bit of an emergency at this point to be able to support these programs. Because there are also a lot of gaps in terms of the reimbursements that come down from the federal government and the amount of funding that schools and school nutrition departments actually get for the program. So it's helping families, it's helping students, but it's also a great investment in our nutrition programs as well, to make sure that they are supported, that they are running properly, and that they can expand and grow and improve in terms of like meal quality, investment. I know a lot of nutrition directors are trying to make investments in expanding culturally relevant foods and, integrating climate action plans into their meal programs. So there's a lot that I think we want to be able to make sure gets done. And this is kind of baseline, a kind of like baseline, important investment to make sure that we are meeting all of the needs of Maryland students and the programs in Maryland to be able to continue that growth moving forward. So yeah, next steps for folks who want to get involved. We do have a coalition. Like I said, there's going to be another bill introduced. We had 3 over the past 3 years. This one coming up in 2025 is going to be very similar, if not almost exactly the same to the one that was introduced last year, which did not pass, but did get a study. So it'll look very similar to those who have been part of the coalition for the past year. But for those who are interested in getting involved, we do have a website. You can also reach out to me. I can put you on the email list. We meet monthly at this point, but when session starts, we'll meet weekly. We also have a couple of opportunities coming up. So Maryland Hunger Solutions does Hear the Crunch every year in March, which is a great advocacy opportunity for those who want to do like more social media campaigning. The American Heart Association also does a lobby day every year in February. And then, you know, for folks who are interested in writing, emailing, calling your representatives, writing an op-ed, you know, any you know, opportunities in that respect, you know, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to help support those opportunities for folks as well. So I think that's it for me. I can stop sharing, but happy to answer questions if folks have any questions about. Oh, I see one in the chat. The study, yeah, so the study that passed last year was the full bill didn't pass, but we did get a study out of the bill. So I think it was pretty pared down. It was mostly just information about like how healthy school meals for all could run, like the expense of it. And that is something that the Department of Legislative Services is doing. I know MSDE is also taking a lot of time and effort to get that data together. So that is still ongoing. Last I heard, I think MSDE has a deadline of December 1st to get that information and data over to the Department of Legislative Services, but I haven't heard a date yet on if they're going to do any sort of like public presentation or briefing to the legislature, but would be happy to pass that along if we get a date eventually.
Thanks so much for the update, Julia. I know third year in a row, so I feel like people, if you've been involved in this work with us, you know, this might be sort of old news, like Julia was saying, the justification and, you know, why this is so important. And I feel like the delegates and senators are pretty well educated. So where is the opportunity this year, I guess? I know the financial situation is at the state level is, I guess, still a little bit uncertain, but that has been the big barrier in past years. So is there anything that you want to share about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always tough going into sessions when we know that the budget isn't there and that they're not a ton of opportunities to get things funded, you know, particularly when all of our asks are very expensive. But I think I will say, and this is a message that we've heard reiterated a number of times, you know, from legislators too, that, you know, things don't get done if the ask isn't made. And so it's important to just keep the message going because, you know, once we stop pushing this message, then the movement dies, you know, nothing's going to get done if we don't ask for it. So even if it's not going to be a full healthy school meals for all bill, just making sure that we continue pushing the message, continue reiterating how important this is. And I think the more they hear that, the more policymakers hear that, the more that it will kind of stick and the more this will become a priority. And then any funding that is available, you know, this will be, you know, one of the first top priority items that gets funded. But that's not going to happen if we don't continue to push the message and continue to ask for it. So yeah, I think there are still opportunities to get things funded even in lean budget years. You know, there are still opportunities to take really meaningful steps forward. And so I would just really encourage folks to keep bringing the message home and make sure the legislators continue to hear it.
Thanks, Julia. Do you mind, and I know you're probably about to do this, dropping your contact info into the chat for folks that want to get involved in the coalition that is led by Maryland Hunger Solutions? We'll certainly share the slides afterwards for those that are just joining us. We also record these meetings and put them on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to go back and rewatch what Julia shared, we welcome you to do that. And I think, Jennifer, maybe you can answer, or sorry, Julia, maybe you can answer Jennifer's question in the chat about the fiscal note from last year. And that way we just make sure we have time to get to everyone, all of our speakers. So I think next we're turning it over to Carrie. And for those who just joined, you're stuck with me as the facilitator today because my wonderful colleague, Jack, is out sick. And so this call is going to be a little bit more informal probably than some of our previous calls, and we welcome folks' participation and asking questions. There will be a time for some open discussion later. So if there are things that you know that are going to impact the food system in the next legislative session that you want to share with the group, there should be time for that toward the end, hopefully. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to share a little bit about the Better Buses Coalition and some of the work that the Coalition for Smart Growth does. The Food Council is involved in both Julia's coalition and Carrie's. So we're just happy to share this with all of you today.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to share some slides that I threw together literally right now from my notes. So they're not going to be like the most beautiful in the world, but I hope it will help people follow. Oh goodness, let me see if I'm presenting this correctly. Okay, can people see my slides? Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for welcoming me today. I'm really excited to be here with you all. My name's Carrie. I'm the Montgomery County Advocacy Manager for the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We work on housing, land use, and zoning, and transportation. And we advocate for walkable, inclusive, bikeable communities with great transit as the most sustainable and equitable way that we can grow our region, welcome new people, and provide opportunities for everyone. So as part of that work, I'm the coordinator for the Montgomery County Better Buses Coalition, and many of our food groups that I recognize on this call are part of the coalition. So again, very, very excited to be here. I picked orange for the slide because it's almost Halloween. Let me see. Okay, so we have 29 member organizations. They're listed very small on the side there, but that's a screenshot from our platform, which is 4 or 5 pages long, and I can share that PDF in the chat after I present, and also send it to Michelle so she can share that link with people. But we have a really broad membership, which I think is one of the big strengths of the coalition. So we're not just like transit-focused organizations, not just kind of like local neighborhood organizations, but organizations that work on food security, racial and economic equity. We have unions, organizations that work on housing because that's so deeply connected. Where we put housing needs to be connected to where people have transit access, and environmental organizations because a lot of this is about sustainability as well. And everybody brings really, really different and really valuable perspectives about the needs that transit is serving in our communities, and where we need to put pressure on our transportation officials to make sure that transit is doing for our communities what we need it to do. So our common interests are, like I said, expressed on our platform, which I'll share, but the main part of our vision is providing frequent transit service. That's really important, so that it's comfortable for people to use. Affordable, high quality service that connects people all around the county to their daily needs, and not just their daily needs, but things like friends, family, entertainment, so that whether or not a person has a car, whether or not they can drive, they're able to access everything, food, jobs, services, all the opportunities, all the places we need to go. And on top of that, it's not just people who depend on transit, who are not able to drive, that are important here. That's the most essential thing. But we also know that transit is really important for a sustainable future. I think the majority, like the largest sector that contributes to carbon emissions in Maryland is transportation. That's like the single largest sector that it comes from. So being able to shift some people from car trips to transit is really important if we're going to, fight climate change, have a more sustainable future. But the only way that we can do that is by making transit a good alternative to driving, which, as we know, there's parts of the county that are really difficult to get to by transit. So in Montgomery County, we have the largest suburban bus network in the entire country. In fact, it's better served than even some major metropolitan areas across the US. So we are starting from a strong foundation of great bus service, but we know that we can always do better. That's where the coalition comes in. And like I said, I really appreciate, what Jack contributes, what others contribute from all the different perspectives that people bring, because that allows us not only to, authentically represent, two county organizations like the Department of Transportation, like, we're not just speaking for one group of people, we're speaking for all the people who use transit, which is a very diverse group. But it also lets us point out things to them that they might miss. So for example, we've been having really great conversations about, as we're doing a bus network redesign or as we're placing stops for bus rapid transit, is that going to give people access to grocery stores? Is that going, with fresh food, things like that, people who are coming from a transportation planning background, like don't always necessarily just immediately think about as part of the planning process. So these are my kind of high level summary of some of the major issue areas we're working on. And then I have this last smaller point that I'll refer to as like a bonus bucket. So some of the main areas that we work on is the implementation of the county's bus rapid transit network. So it's often abbreviated BRT. And that is on a few major like corridors, often the state highways, like Veers Mill Road and Rockville Pike, doing like frequent bus service and dedicated lanes. And so that plan has been in place since 2012. The only one kind of operating right now is US 29 Flash, and it's not in dedicated lanes yet. So there's a ways to go, but the County Department of Transportation has recently been taking a lot of steps to move BRT forward. So we monitor that. We make sure that we believe it's going to serve the community. Similar to that, we do monitoring of changes to the bus network. We just are at the tail end of a kind of long overdue redesign of the county bus network called Ride On Reimagined. We're waiting for the final report on that, but when the DOT does changes to routes, they have public hearings, so that's something that we track, as well as maintaining consistent funding and also improving funding where we can for transit service, being a voice for that during budget hearings, both at the state and county level. And in terms of state legislative advocacy, local funding for local transportation systems was actually threatened last year because of the crunch for transportation funding. And so that did get put back into the budget, but that is probably going to be a major area of advocacy for us in the next session. And then two other ongoing things that are going on that are exciting, dedicated bus lane pilots. There's one on University Boulevard and one on Georgia Avenue. Those, from my perspective, the value of them is they basically kind of put transit riders on like even ground with cars, and give people who are riding transit kind of like a fighting chance to get through traffic. Because you'll have like 50 people on a bus who get stopped up in traffic behind maybe like 10 people in cars. So it helps the bus go faster. There's a great study on Georgia Avenue right now where they're finding there's not really a traffic impact, negatively impacting people driving by taking away one of the, car lanes for just bus. So I'll pause there because we can always talk more about that later, but that's exciting. I hope we'll see more of that. And then final kind of main issue area, big legislative win from this year's legislative session was the Better Bus Service Act, which is, if you've heard of the Clear Lanes pilot in DC, which is cameras on buses to enforce dedicated bus lanes. We're working on some pilots right now in Montgomery County to do that here, and we're now allowed to do that because of enabling legislation. So one of the most exciting things about that is automated traffic enforcement is like just multiple times like far more racially equitable than traffic enforcement by just police stops. So that is, I think, one of the great things about it. It's more equitable and it helps transit riders. And then final bonus bucket here, we do share amongst ourselves, because we cover so many different issues in our member organizations, info on opportunities to take action on other things that are related to or like supportive of transit. So that can be like zoning, housing policy, like putting more housing near transit so people have access, pedestrian and like bike improvements so people can safely reach bus stops. And then kind of getting to my last slide here, getting involved. So we have a listserv that people can join, which is where we'll share like a lot of those opportunities on related issues. And I find that like it's a good community. People share info, and that's like really helpful. We meet monthly, once a month, Mondays, 10 a.m. for a half hour. Everyone is welcome to join that. We have good discussions. We catch up on what's going on with buses. It's a good time. And then we also have quarterly updates with like the senior leadership at the county DOT. So we hear from them like what's going on with, you know, BRT and bus performance. But it's also a chance for us to ask some very pointed questions about what they're doing to help bus riders and if they've thought about some of the things our organizations work on. So I will drop my email in the chat, but it's also on this slide. Best way to get involved is just shoot me an email and let me know you're interested. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. I lost my cursor for a minute trying to find the mute button.
I lost the Zoom when I closed the presentation. I was like, where did everyone go?
Yeah, that happened on my end as well. Does anyone have questions for Carrie? I have one, but I'll pause. Lorian.
Yeah, sure. Carrie, thank you so much. I'm always fascinated with what you all do to promote smarter growth. And thanks so much for that great presentation to detail it. My question has to do with something that I work with farmers for the Food Council. And one of the things that I know they're always talking about is the sort of a lot of the services in the agricultural reserve. And we have our annual farmer forum where farmers raise sort of issues of concern for them. And at our past farmer forum in February, one of the things that ideas that farmers sort of, were talking about was the idea of the fact that they have trouble with farm labor and they have trouble with workers being able to transport themselves out to farms. And, I know a lot of them were saying we just need a dedicated ride-on bus. So I'm wondering if that sort of ever crosses your all's radar as the idea of sort of, having bus service, bus lines to sort of some of the less populated areas as well, just for like labor force.
Mm-hmm. That is a really good question. So I'll kind of say three things here. I think the first one is like, those are some voices that I would love to have in the coalition. Like, I think that's the perfect space to talk about things like that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. The second thing is, I think there's some like first of all, transit and like bus service should definitely support like economic opportunities. That's one of the main things, like one of the main reasons it's important. So I agree that like that would be a useful thing for the like county DOT to think about. And the example that comes to mind is I know that they pretty specifically retained a pretty low ridership line that goes out like to Glenstone, like the Glenstone Museum, at the request of the museum, because they said like this is the only way that people can get here without a car. So there is a precedent where people, a certain interest group lobbied for a particular line for a very specific purpose to a specific place and did get that. But the third thing is that a new relatively new service that the county is expanding, proposing to expand in the network redesign is called Ride on Flex, which is on-demand microtransit. Which basically means you can like use an app or use like a phone to call the dispatch and get a almost like door-to-door ride within certain zones. And I will say on a kind of like, especially the environmental level and the sustaining funding for the like fixed route transit, in some places that have introduced on-demand services, like you have to be a little careful because it can be more expensive than like regular bus service. It can kind of like cannibalize the existing bus service if you're not careful. But, and I know this is a really long answer, I'm getting to the point, but it can be a really good solution for places that don't have high enough ridership to sustain like a fixed route, but where people really need service, places like the Ag Reserve, and then connecting people like as like a last mile solution to specific destinations or like fixed route service. So I can share more information about where they're planning to implement those zones. I know they like prioritized some of them for the first 5 years of the network redesign, but I think like that is a solution that could have some applicability.
Great question, Lorianne. Thanks. And thanks, Carrie, for that thoughtful response. It sounds like Lorianne will be connecting Carrie and information about how to get involved in the Better Buses Coalition with the farmer network that we convene as well. So making those connections is what we do at the Food Council. Other questions for Carrie? And I know she's going to drop her email in the chat if she hasn't already. But if folks want to get involved in the Better Buses Coalition or anything else happening over there in the Coalition for Smarter Growth, because this is just one of many things that they work on, as Carrie mentioned, definitely excited to make that connection between Carrie and this group of folks that like to talk about advocacy. So I have a couple surprise additions that I've been working on in the chat to our speaker list as everyone's been speaking. And so now I'm going to turn it over to JD Robinson from Maryland Hunger Solutions to see if he can share a little bit of information about things that we can anticipate this upcoming legislative session related to SNAP. And JD, while you're at it, if you want to share any reflections that came from last week's legislative brainstorming that Maryland Hunger Solutions hosted, I welcome you and Julia to just both share with this group in case folks missed it. I missed it. Some key takeaways or anything that we should be aware of. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. And thanks for letting me be a surprise guest. Hi, everybody. I do love surprises. Yeah, so like Michelle was saying, JD Douglas Robinson, I am the Senior Program Associate for SNAP at Maryland Hunger Solutions, Julia's counterpart on the SNAP side of the work that we do here in the state. I think I'll start with a review of the legislative brainstorming session from last week. I think one, Julia brought up a lot of really good points during her presentation, is that, like, yes, potential deficit year, potential just not a great year for getting legislation passed. But at the same time, if we're not raising these issues, if we're not talking about them, they don't get raised, they don't get brought up. And I think we were fortunate enough on the day to have both Delegate Gabe Acevedo of PG County and also Senator Cory McCray of Baltimore City to kind of provide a legislative recap of 2024 and kind of set the stage for next year. And they both raise similar points, is that, you know, we can only really take what we have as far as budget stuff, but, you know, when it comes to bringing forth legislation, we need to continue to raise the issues that we care about as advocates, and that to continue to drum up support among the legislature as well. We're fortunate enough to have both of them, and as they both sit on appropriations and budget and taxation respectively. And I know that we also have champions and Delegate Shetty in Montgomery County, who also sits on appropriations and actually chairs the subcommittee on health and human services. And, you know, she's been a really crucial part of getting our SNAP supplement bill across the finish line this past session, and we're going to look to her again next year. But, you know, I think the one thing that's definitely on a lot of people's minds right now is that budget deficit. And I think I speak for Julia as well. We're not budget experts. That's why we always like tap in our colleagues over at Maryland Center on Economic Policy to kind of really break things down for us. But I think a couple of things that were raised by Callie Shumitz from MedSep, as well as Senator McCray and Delegate Acevedo, is that, you know, one of the things we should really start thinking about, or at least Delegate Acevedo has been thinking about, is revenues and where we're getting revenues from, and taxing folks that need to have their taxes brought in to help fund these programs. And it was just really refreshing to kind of hear that coming from a state legislative representative. And Delegate Acevedo, he has introduced a language access bill that not only would affect SNAP but all public benefit programs and most state agencies. We're looking to have that reintroduced again next year. And I know that one is not really being led by us. We have really strong partners in Public Justice Center who have been leading the charge on that both years it's been introduced. And that one also is getting a bit of a boost this year because Baltimore City, at least for Mayor Brandon Scott, has just proposed codifying the city's language access policy into law. And so that's going to kind of hopefully boost things a little bit to kind of bring this push on at the state level. And after some question asking around the governor's office, apparently there is potential for this language access policy and plan and the people providing the oversight to be housed somewhere within the governor's office of immigration, which hasn't really been staffed yet, but could be a jumping off point to make sure that this legislation moves forward, just because one of the issues we had within 2024 was that a lot of folks are kind of bouncing around where it would be housed. And we know that, especially in Baltimore City and especially in Montgomery County, a lot of immigrant and mixed status families just have the worst time accessing SNAP, among other benefits. They get letters that aren't their preferred language. They get interview calls in English. Unfortunately, in Baltimore City, we've had people turned away at the door at DSS offices because they're not speaking the language that the security guard is speaking. And so, these are things that we know are happening, and to have this bill pass would be critical, again, not just for folks looking to access SNAP, but all of the other public benefits they may be looking to access, and also just have a better relationship with their government, whether at the state or really local level within the counties. Going to really quickly try to just burn through some of the other SNAP stuff we're thinking about. I already mentioned the SNAP supplement. As you all may or may not know, last year we tried to raise the minimum for SNAP from the still federal $23 a month. I just want to let everyone know that the COLA adjustments happened on October 1st. This usually raises things a little bit for everybody, and it did for the most part. However, they decided that the minimum was going to remain $23 a month. We proposed to raise that to 95 in 2024, and we're going to be kind of changing gears a little bit. That legislation was very much mimicking New Jersey's. We're looking to mimic this time around DC. Proposed a 10% increase for everyone on SNAP across the board, and that bill passed and was funded. And that is something that is going to have obviously a much more far-reaching spread of use for SNAP residents, especially those that are receiving the maximum, which we know are likely the folks that have the lowest incomes. And so that's something that will likely that we'll be looking to get passed next year. Unfortunately, we don't have a DLS estimate on that one. The one for the $95 increase was also fairly pricey, and the 10% is going to be, that there's going to be a little bit more math to do there. But like Julia was saying, these are pricey bills, but we know the state can do them if there's the political will. There's two others that I already talking the language access bill, and then there's another one which we're kind of continuing to shop around to folks, and I'm actually going to go ahead and put the California legislation we're looking to mimic here in the chat. So California just passed a really, really robust bill that would allow the pre-release enrollment of incarcerated individuals into SNAP 30 days before they are released from whatever prison they are a part of. The pre-release waiver is kind of in line step. Maryland has one currently for Medicaid, and so linking the two would be a bit of a to-do, and a lot of this bill, at least the one in California, does a lot of things to kind of shore up that process by, one, making sure that there are people involved in all sectors in a working group involving Department of Human Services, Department of Corrections, formerly incarcerated individuals that were on SNAP either before their incarceration or after, to kind of help guide the process. And then, of course, the community-based organizations that may be assisting with this process. This all hinges on DHS applying for an FNS waiver. This is a waiver states can apply for, and this was something that DHS had interest in last year when we were kind of bringing up legislation around this time in 2023. So we're hoping to kind of mimic a lot of this basically kind of one-to-one here in Maryland. It's going to take a lot of moving pieces here, especially from those within the Department of Corrections sector. But we're hopeful that we can kind of at least get the ball rolling here, especially again with our healthcare partners in the Medicaid field that vouch for this Medicaid pre-release. I think we've had it since 2015, maybe even earlier than that. And so obviously SNAP's a different beast, but something that we're really looking forward to is getting this at least introduced in some way, and get the conversation started. So I feel like I was given 5 minutes and I've taken up 10, so I'm going to go ahead and shut up. Thanks for having me.
I mean, this is a call to be open and let folks know what's going on. And so JD, you always do such a great job summarizing a lot of information. Do folks have questions for JD? I think JD, if there are opportunities for folks on this call who may not be involved in sort of the minutia or the staying up to date on what's going on in the General Assembly related to SNAP, how would you suggest that they stay involved or get involved?
So I will continue to kind of, we have a coalition for the SNAP supplement that will probably start meeting as early as December. To answer Jennifer's question in the chat, no, the 10% SNAP increase has not already passed. That has passed in DC, and it's called Give SNAP a Raise. I'll find that and I'll put it in the chat. So yeah, the coalition calls are probably gonna be the best way to kind of stay connected. I believe we'll likely, Maryland Hunger Solutions will be putting out a blog post at the beginning of session just to kind of outline our priorities. And those are going to be kind of the best ways that are, if you're not like fully tapped in week to week during session, as a lot of folks aren't, totally understand. Wish I was you. It's very stressful. But at the same time, I'd say like those are the best ways to do it. And then, if you have the means to make a MyMGA account, there's a really great way to kind of build your own tracking list there, and you can kind of update it week to week, day to day. It takes a bit of it to do to kind of get off the ground, but if you have, just like an hour to set aside at the beginning of session to just kind of scroll through all the bills you want to look at, including the ones that have our priorities, it's a really great way to kind of see who's on the committees, who's writing testimony. That's going to be for the folks that want to be a little bit more tapped in, but aren't able to come to all these meetings and just want to have stuff at a glance.
We actually have I'm going to drop the MyMGA link into the chat as well. I think 2 years ago, at some point we had a training on how folks could sign up for MyMGA and use it to track bills and stay involved. And so I will go back into the archives, or Jack will when he is feeling better, to share that around with folks that have registered for this call in case they are interested in reviewing that video. So thanks, JD, for mentioning it. I also did want to pass it back over to Julia in case you had additional reflections from the event last week that folks might be interested to hear.
Yeah, I mean, JD did a great job of summarizing what we heard. I think the only other thing that I would mention that got brought up is that we are just a few days away from a really important date that I think is looming over a lot of people's minds and taking up a lot of space. But I think one of the messages that we got from our legislators, Senator McCray and Delegate Acevero, is that regardless of what happens on Tuesday, we are all a lot of us probably are a part of nonpartisan nonprofits, which means, and I think this is a really special part of our work, it means that, regardless of what happens and who, whatever may come on Tuesday and who ends up in the government, our jobs and our messages don't change, and our anti-hunger issues should not be partisan issues. We will continue to push that message and continue doing that work and working with the governments that we have in power. And just kind of reiterating that, all of our voices are incredibly important, and there is a role of everyone in the room. Whoever wants to get involved, and particularly uplifting the voices of those with lived expertise, and just making sure that there's room at the table for everyone. So I think with that, I would just encourage everyone, even if you're new to the space and new to advocacy, to just reach out and make sure that you're taking advantage of the opportunities that come up in this space, and tap into the folks in the room who have opportunities, and however we can help support, if it's helpful to work with you all, Michelle, and doing some trainings on Advocacy 101s, or taking some time to help folks get signed up for MyMGA accounts. We're available for that. So just making sure that is a message that gets passed along, because I think it's an important one.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And to that point about getting more involved in the session, I'm actually going to turn over to another surprise guest who I arranged in the chat to speak. So Annika from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management has joined us. But before I turn over to Annika for just 5 minutes, I want to let folks say, feel free to drop anything you want us to know about as a group in the chat. We probably don't have as much time for discussion as I thought because I pulled speakers out of the group to help inform our discussion today. So if anyone wants to share anything, feel free to do that in the chat. Annika, I would love for you to share just real quick about the CNC committee and what that work is and how folks can stay up to date.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? So I'll just keep it short and sweet. There are many meetings coming up for the State Food Council, the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council, but the Communication and Coordination Committee is the committee that has traditionally stayed on top of Maryland legislation related to food system stuff. And this year, or this upcoming legislative session, the CNC committee is really hoping to get more community members involved in those weekly calls. They're on Mondays from 1 to 2 p.m. starting January 13th. And they go through early April. So all of those calls are available to anyone to attend on the council's webpage. And I'm just going to put it in the chat here. But yeah, we hope that you'll come participate in those meetings and engage in conversation there. We also have a handful of meetings coming up this fall. There's a lunch and learn on December 9th on food as medicine. And yeah, if there's any questions about the FSRC, I don't want to take up too much time. I'm happy to touch base with you offline later on. Does that work, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Thanks so much, Annika. And for folks who want to learn more about the Food System Resiliency Council, reach out to Annika, who put her contact info in the chat. Thank you, Annika. But also, I am the representative from the Food Council. That's the appointed member to the State Food Council. And I also happen to co-chair the CNC committee that Annika just referenced, which is one reason why we don't host these calls typically during the session, because we are busy hosting those calls on a weekly basis and tracking the session as it happens. So what you can expect from the Food Council during the legislative session is a more active newsletter, advocacy newsletter. And between now and then, I'll make sure that all the folks that have registered via Zoom are added to that newsletter. And you'll be able to cancel it if you want to. But yeah, we'll keep folks informed what's going on that way. I did want to just, in the interest of transparency, share a little bit of info about our state legislator breakfast that happened last week. This, some food council events are open to the public. This one we keep, purposefully small. We had 8 of our local Montgomery County delegates in attendance. You can find more info a little bit and some photos on our LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. But, some insights that I found surprising, because I guess I'm in this work day in and day out, is that I think some of the delegates are not aware of what's happening on the ground, which makes sense because not all of them are super focused on food system issues like we are. They might have other areas that are their major focus areas, but they weren't aware, some of them, that food insecurity is rising in Montgomery County and in the Capital Area Food Bank region. They weren't aware about, who is really impacted based on that report. It's, folks with around that self-sufficiency standard that Julia was mentioning are the population that report saw food insecurity specifically increasing in, or it was increasing the most within that population of folks that are right at around that self-sufficiency standard income level. And so I just think I say this to share that I think all of us, making sure that we are sharing what we're hearing and what's going on with our elected representatives is important so that they can make informed decisions about prioritizing policymaking in a tough budget cycle. And so, this is why we host these calls, to bring folks together, to strategize, to educate. But, I just want to make sure that everyone feels like they have the right information to share. And hopefully through this call, you got tapped into some folks that you can reach out to for more specifics or to get involved in coalitions. And, you know, that's what we're trying to do is, you know, build up our advocacy skills and tools. And I'll just pause to see if any of my colleagues, Anne Marie or Elizabeth, would like to share any takeaways from the legislator breakfast last week that you want to share.
I don't have anything in addition. I think you summed it up pretty well. Yeah, it was just a great opportunity, you know, though, to really hear their thoughts on those issues, you know, discuss them with them. And I think everyone really appreciated being there and felt like they got a lot out of it. So just a successful event. So congrats to Michelle and Jack for arranging that.
Thanks, Anne Marie. So we have a few minutes. If anyone has anything that they would like to share with the group about upcoming opportunities or advocacy opportunities or any events. I've gotten really good at the awkward pause. So I guess we're going to end 5 minutes early. So thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate the more informal nature of this particular call and the variety of speakers that we were able to hear from. So thanks to folks for sharing info about what's coming. And we will do our best to summarize all of that info and send it out via email. This is also recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, as I mentioned, and the link to that will be shared in our follow-up correspondence. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.